If you don't already know what the Sapiens Academy is, then you should know it's the best, most premium, intellectual Islamic academy in the world with the most qualified personnel in the world. With 100 years combined dawah experience, tackling things, by the way, nobody else is tackling these things. Nobody else is going to be tackling the feminism, liberalism, atheism. No one is qualified to talk about these things in as much the same way as the Sapiens Academy. Click the link below and enroll now. I think it's important, since we are on the topic of Ibn Taymiyyah, and only fair, and we were talking about Salafism, and he's got a massive influence on Neo-Salafism and also Salafism as a whole, and Hanbalism and Atharism, that we compare him with Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab, okay? Because a lot of people believe that these two figures have the same views when it comes to some of the matters. And there are some similarities between the two figures. Both of them followed the Hanbali madhab. Both of them followed Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Actually, Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab has works written on the Hanbali madhab. He does have those. No one really consults them from the Hanbali madhab, but nevertheless, he does have those words. The main key difference, which has an impact demographically between what I like to call, was not pejorative, using the term Wahhabi, even though, by the way, Albani uses this term. He says Mali al-Wahhabiyya. Albani uses the term Wahhabi, and he uses it polemically. I don't like to use that term because it's a pejorative sort of term, and it alienates a lot of people. I use the term Najdism. Okay, now the term Najdism is because Najd is the area in Saudi Arabia where not just Abdul Wahhab, but his followers inhabited this area, and a lot of the ideas subsequent to Ibn AbdulWahhab, who died 1792, by the way, so we're talking a good 500 years after Ibn Taymiyyah, and who was obviously instrumental in the formation of the current Saudi state. And this is a very important consideration, by the way, that him and Ibn Saud actually teamed up together and had an alliance that essentially formed the current state of Saudi Arabia, all right? And so what's important to note is that sort of after that alliance until, let's say, throughout the 1800s, where there was also what Western historians refer to as the Wahhabi Ottoman Wars. I don't know if you've come across that, but obviously the Ottoman Empire and this particular group of people in Najd went to war together against each other. So this is part of the reason. But part of what informed the movement and formed that behavior was the views on takfir. Okay. Now, no matter what someone wants to say, it's intellectually dishonest to equate the views of Ibn Taymiyyah with the views of Ibn AbdulWahhab when it comes to takfir. It's completely dishonest, because I'll tell you why. I'll give you some evidence with this, right? Ibn AbdulWahhab, for the most part, even most modern day Salafi scholars will say that he did not believe in a concept called al-'adl bil-jahl. There are three things in particular that Ibn AbdulWahhab was very strict about, which are basically incommensurate with modern Salafism, which is, by the way, another repudiation of modern Neo-Salafism, because we said that they're mixing ideas which are not actually congruent with each other. One of those ideas was istighatha. We know what that is, where people would call to the Prophet, Ya Muhammad, Ya Ali, in whatever form, okay? And there's a question of, is there al-'adl bil-jahl or is there al-'adl bil-jahl among the sort of Salafis? Are these people to be excused or are they not to be excused? That's one question. The other question is to do with tawalli, or allying themselves with the disbelievers. And Ibn AbdulWahhab had this very staunch view when it came to that if you allied yourself with a disbeliever, then it makes you a disbeliever yourself. Okay. And the third one is al-hukm bighayri ma anzal Allah, or a ruling by what Allah has not revealed. And Ibn AbdulWahhab had a very staunch view on that. Okay. And you can just look at his works and, he had a very staunch view on that. So the question would beg itself, was if Ibn AbdulWahhab was alive today, what would he make of the current Muslim states? So how would he designate them? And you couldn't argue that he would designate them as acceptable. He would make takfir of all of them. He would consider them all to be non-Muslims. because they are doing tawalli, they're doing al-hukm bighayri ma anzalallah. And he did not believe in al-Bajjah. So the idea that the neo-Salafi movement, I was trying to tell us khuruj al-hakim and all this kind of stuff, it wouldn't be applicable to Ibn AbdulWahhab. He would say this is not applicable, it's only applicable to Muslims. And these guys are not Muslims. So the Najdi movement is not the same as the neo-Salafi movement. They're closer to the Takfiri groups, the ones that you saw in Syria, for example. They were more faithful to Najdism than current neo-Salafis are. All right. And in Saudi Arabia, you know, like, for example, Ibn Baz, famous scholar in the 90s, who made a very famous fatwa of America being able to position themselves in Saudi, which was very critical. A lot of people are critical of this fatwa. That his teacher essentially had completely different views on these issues, on Adab al-Jahl and Hukm bighayri anzalallah. He would designate certain peoples and states and stuff to be disbelievers. So, he was asked about this, Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, and he was asked about his teacher, and he said, what do you think of that? And he said that, you know, my teacher was wrong about this. So Ibn Baz acknowledges the differences, and he actually repudiates them. That's one aspect. So the time of Ibn Baz and Ibn Uthaymeen, and Albani was the most lenient when it comes to these matters. So much so that he was accused, wrongfully so, of al-irja and all these kinds of things. That he was somebody who was a murji, or the person, you know, it's a different issue, right? But putting that to the side, the modern Salafi scholars from the 80s and 90s, and up until this day, Fawzan and these guys, like, if you read their books, right, you would think they're Najdis, but when implementation, they're the least Najdi you can find. And this thing confuses people, because on paper, you should be making takfir of this state and that state and these people and those people. But in reality, you're telling us not to do khuruj on these ones, and you're telling us to be obedient to these ones. That's what's caused a lot of friction among different groups, claimants of Salafis. Some people call them Salafi jihadis versus the quietists. This is how, like, the Westerners divide the different types of Salafis, etc., right, in the modern day. But Ibn Taymiyyah was not like Ibn AbdulWahhab in the matter of excuse making. I'll give you one clear example of that. Ibn Taymiyyah, one of his interlocutors was a man called al-Bakri, okay? And they were going back and forth on the issue of al-istighatha. Now, Ibn Taymiyyah, by the way, has, on theoretical level, quite similar view to the Najdis on istighatha, but there are some key differences. For example, in his book, Iqtida' Sirat al-Mustaqim, he says that if someone does istighatha in the site of the grave, so someone goes to the grave of the Prophet and says, "Ya Muhammad, yeah, such and such," and he believes that Muhammad ﷺ can hear him, etc., and he believes that Muhammad ﷺ will present that information to Allah, Ibn Taymiyyah does not consider that to be shirk. He considers that to be bid'ah. He mentions that in Iqtida' Sirat al-Mustaqim clearly, and I don't think there's much controversy about that. Yeah, from all the people I've spoken to, that's a fairly established position. Which means there's a difference of opinion among Ibn AbdulWahhab, theoretical difference of opinion, and Ibn Taymiyyah on what constitutes shirk in istighatha. That's a fair thing to say. There's more overlap than there's a more theoretical overlap than there is a theoretical discontinuity. But nevertheless, that's important to mention. But then when it comes to implementation, there's a huge overlap. So, for example, there's a huge discontinuity. There's a completely different approach, because Ibn AbdulWahhab, he did not believe al-Adab al-Jahl. He believed that someone calling out to is whoever it may be, this person is apostate. He believes he's now an apostate. That's what he believed. Ibn Taymiyyah didn't believe that. Al-Bakri, who Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a book called Al-Raddu al-Bakri. He actually wrote a book on him. Yeah, Al-Raddu al-Bakri, the response to al-Bakri, a refutation of al-Bakri, a refutational video. Yeah, Al-Bakri was accused of certain things from the state, and he was a fugitive. And despite the fact, by the way, al-Bakri responded to Ibn Taymiyyah, made takfir on Taymiyyah, because he doesn't believe this. That's how far he went. He says, "You don't believe in it? You actually left Islam." Ibn Taymiyyah doesn't make takfir of al-Bakri. Not only that, he actually helps him escape from the authorities, and he hosts him in his house. So you can't tell me he had the same view as Ibn Taymiyyah or Ibn AbdulWahhab when it comes to Jahl and these things. To the point where the early Najdi movement, and you can read this, Tarikh Najd, by Ibn Bishop. This is a famous primary source 2-volume work. Yeah, Tarikh Najd by Ibn Bishop, 2-volume work. And you can see what they're doing, yeah, in their early days. They're designating people in the Najd. They're designating them as disbelievers, okay? They're saying these guys here are disbelievers, these guys here are disbelievers because of al-istighatha, and they are saying it's okay to take their women and children as slaves. You cannot compare this behavior, which would be unacceptable to anybody today, with the behavior of Ibn Taymiyyah. So the fact that there's some people that kind of combine them together and say, like, I follow this and that, these two people would differ with each other quite heavily on these matters. Okay. And the Najdi movement is a movement characterized by takfir, by actual implementable takfir, because of issues of those 3 issues in particular: al-istighatha, al-tawalli, and al-hukm bighayri ma anzala Allah. The adhab al-jahl issue, or the excuse making situation for the early Najdis, was very low. And they actually executed people because of this. Okay, they had beliefs where they would execute. Now, we are people that believe in difference of opinion, but I'm sorry to say, but when it comes to killing people now, this is where we have to draw the line. And that's why early Najdism is very indefensible. To the point where if you ask somebody who actually defends Najdism, if somebody went to Pakistan today, okay, he says, I'm going to implement the Sharia, I'm going to do this, and he goes to the different villages, he goes to the Brelvis and he starts killing them and taking their women and children as slaves. What would you say about that person? As a Salafi, how would you designate that person? If not a terrorist that needs to be themselves punished, you would designate them as a terrorist. The whole ummah would be against them. So why are we giving this special exception to a group of people that came, that were doing things that were very questionable, which are recorded in history and mentioned by primary sources like Ibn Bishr in Tarikh al-Najd? The only reason why we give them these excuses is because I believe nationalism. You might be surprised by this, wallahi, this my conclusion. But I believe it's because of Arab nationalism. That's the reason why these are being defended. And that's another discussion for another day, but it's actually a nationalistic thing. That's just my opinion. But I cannot see any other reason why this can be defended like this, even though they don't actually believe it, and even though we know exactly what they did, and even though if they implemented it, it would be like those takfirist groups that we spoke about. Except that you need to preserve the honor and integrity of these historical figures for nationalistic reasons, and then those nationalistic reasons spread to other countries through propagation. That there was propagation, that they were then being called now the revivers. This was all excellent work that would be killing the people, and you know, I want to know what you're talking about. What? So there is a difference between Najdism and Atharism. And that's why Salafi is too broad of a term now. If you're a Salafi, are you a quietist? Are you a Najdi? Are you a takfirist? We don't even know where you are, what you are. The term now has lost meaning. You know, if you ask someone, where's Allah? And he says above the throne, okay. What do you think of istighatha? He doesn't agree with it. Okay, no problem. What now? Now let me ask you about birthdays of the Prophet. Okay, that's maybe something else. A fourth question. Let me ask you, what do you think about hukm bighayri ma anzala Allah? That's a different question now. We're going to see what kind of Salafi we're talking about. What do you think of these hukam? What do you think of that? There are questions that you can ask to ascertain what kind of Salafi we're talking about, but they're all different. The quietist versus this and that. But this was an important disclaimer, because a lot of people intellectually, they just lump them all together. These guys, Ahmad and Ibn Taymiyyah and the Najdis and Ibn AbdulWahhab, they're not the same. Their contributions were different. Their ambitions were different. Ibn Taymiyyah was way more similar to a lot in his implementation of these things of the guys we spoke about before than he is to the current Najdi movement. I promise you. Maybe not Ibn Sina, definitely not Ibn Sina, but he was closest to the Ash'aris in implementation. Like, he was more of an intellectual. You know, this is you disagree with this, you disagree with this. Is Ahl Sunnah, fine. He has staunch views as well. He was a polemic, but He wasn't going to kill anyone if you claim to be a Muslim. He wasn't going to bring out his sword and actually say, "We'll take your wife and child as a slave." He was never going to start doing that. So, any questions on this? Yeah. All right.
Has this video empowered you? Turned conviction into action? Trained to call to Islam with wisdom and mercy, following the prophetic path? Enroll at Sapiens Academy now to join the 10,000 accredited intellectual ambassadors we're developing by 2030. Prepare today, lead tomorrow, enroll now. Get accredited, click the link below.